Just one more day until Arsenal can get their Premier League title challenge. We hope back underway. We've got news regarding Edu's potential replacement, team news, and Mikel Arteta's press conference to talk about. This is the Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part indeed of your morning routines. It is incredibly appreciated. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing well. And thank you to everyone that's tuning in live as always on a weekend. It is much trickier, tougher, more challenging, I understand, on a weekend. So it is even more appreciated than usual. And for those that are listening on catch-up as well, we of course do put this out on all the usual audio platforms, hopefully without fail. So good morning to those joining us live in the chat. Matt G, Peter, Tom, Arasilki, Stevie, Franklin. We got Temi and Barry T, Carl, Louis, Grantley Poos, Kim, NSW, and plenty more of you all as well. I don't know if I brought it up. I put a tweet out the other day, but I don't think I actually mentioned it on the live on the show before. Thank you for everybody that of course did indeed buy tickets for the live event that of course is next year in February, because as of a few weeks ago, and I think I'm pretty sure I forgot to mention it on the show, we sold out. So thank you to everyone that bought tickets. I can't wait to join you all in February for the event. But it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a full room full of people. And it's going to be hopefully a fantastic experience. And I'm kind of banking. It's the same week as the Champions League playoff rounds, which I'm hoping, of course, Arsenal aren't involved in, and we would have shot straight through to the top 8 of that. But there's a lot of football, still to be played, but it is that week. Don't worry, it's not going to be moved or cancelled if indeed Arsenal are in that, because the games will take place on either the Tuesday or the Wednesday, whereas of course Arsenal will be involved. We'll be involved in a live show on the Thursday. So it's a little bit like you're hedging your bets on Arsenal doing quite well, so you've got a free week. Otherwise, we'll hopefully be talking about an Arsenal win either way, but more fixtures to talk about as well. Right, let's jump to today's stories, though, shall we? Make sure you're dropping a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, with those notifications turned on, though, of course. And we start with the women's team being much, much better. And it seems that they really have recovered, from the awful start to the campaign. It's not been smooth sailing or perfect, but a 5-0 win over Brighton and Hove Albion is certainly one that will help the mood and help the form and help to continue this resurgence. Goals from Beth Mee, Caitlin Ford, Frida Marnham, Lena Hurtig, who's returned to the action as well after a bit of an injury a few weeks ago. She's returned now, and she returned obviously a couple of weeks ago, but it's good to see her back on the pitch and scoring goals. And Alessia Russo of a 95th minute penalty as well, which leaves Arsenal still in the hunt. They are 7 points off of Manchester City, who have won 6 and drawn 1 in the table so far. Chelsea can still go top of the table because they've won all 5 of the games. They've missed 2 matches. They've still got to play. Of course, one this weekend. They've got a game in hand as well. Manchester United, of course, 1 point behind Arsenal, but have played 2 games less. Also, Liverpool, 3 points behind, but have played a game less than Arsenal as well. So it's not like we're going to win the league this season. I don't think anyone's expecting that based upon the start that Arsenal had to the season. But, there's still, of course, hope in cup competitions. They still hope that they might be able to do something in the Champions League, despite, of course, a pretty poor start in that competition as well. But they did get the win that they needed over Vålerenga. Yes, it's a positive return. Let's wait and see what happens. Julian Timber has returned for the first time to the Netherlands international side, following, of course, that injury he suffered quite some time ago now. But he's now returned, and he has been called up to the squad, which is, of course, I think a big benefit in some ways. And in other ways, it's not, because we obviously want Timber to be fully protected. We want Timber to be, not necessarily being used. But I think for his career, of course, it remains a key part of his ambitions, and it's good to see him back in the squad. So talking of other call-ups, both David Raya and Mikel Merino also called up for the Spain squad, the European champions, I've got games, of course, in the UEFA Nations League, just like England do. But despite Merino's questionable form so far, he's still being called up to the Spain squad at the moment. So congrats to both of Raya and to Merino also. Now, the big story to talk about is Mr. Tomas Rosicky has been considered, according to Santi Una, for the role of sporting director at Arsenal. He is among a number of people that are being supposedly considered for the job and for the role. He's obviously at the moment, he's been at Sparta Prague. He's been at Sparta Prague for quite some time, actually, Tomas Rosicky, and has helped them in a number of ways. Of course, returning back to the Champions League, returning to, in some ways, competitivity, because Sparta Prague were out in the cold for a little while. A big club, of course, in the Czech Republic, and one that were overtaken for a while by Slavia Prague, amongst others also. But his work there has been highly regarded, and he is a player, of course, that has his links with Arsenal also. Yes, it's Victoria Pilsen being another team, of course. But Sparta Prague have been involved in those races for European places, and he's helped them to get back to competitivity. I don't think he would be necessarily my first choice or other people's first choices in kind of this space. I think, obviously, I've looked at someone like Simon Rolfs by Leverkusen and look at the work that's been done there and other big European clubs. But for those that like that Arsenal connection, he is a potential candidate. It's also worth pointing out, and our good friend of the show, Drew, actually, who desperately needs to, and I know you're watching, Drew, you need to come back on the show at some point as well, sent me a tweet this morning from an account called The False Nine. And they were pointing out this morning that about Tomas Rosicky, the tweet was, honestly, have no idea if Rosicky is a good sporting director, but under him, Sparta Prague have returned to the Champions League for the first time in 19 years, as well as 2 titles and 2 cups. If he favours technical players like he was, could be a great addition. So that's just kind of a view. It's like you can see what's happened to Sparta Prague under his leadership, and he's helped progress that squad. Someone pointed out saying, kind of, if he was to bring him in, they're Arteta's friends. We need someone who has a great relationship with agents and kind of the worldwide transfer sphere. To which they replied with a very fair response, saying, "Do you remember our windows when we had guys like that?" Of course, you think about Raul Sanllehi, someone with huge contacts around the world, links to agents, links to players. We have had people involved at the club that have got their links and contacts with all of these kind of major agents, major players around the world, and yet they went off and bought Socrates or Pepe. It wasn't as if, and this Raul Sanllehi worked at Barcelona for a long time, was very highly regarded for his work at Barcelona. Just because he's got all of these experience and contacts doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do an amazing job. You need to find someone who's helped progress things. You need to find someone with a good rap sheet of actually signing players that have helped the squad move into more competitive spaces, which, of course, Raul Sanllehi didn't do at Arsenal. But Rosicky has shown progression with Sparta Prague. Still wouldn't be my first choice, sure. Per Mertesacker being the other name mentioned here too. I struggle with the Per Mertesacker one. He's head of the academy. I feel as though it's a different kettle of fish in terms of kind of being a sporting director. He would be learning on the job, and I'm not sure I want someone to learn on the job this time around. We had that with Mikel Arteta, and it's worked out for the best, but I don't think I want a sporting director that's learning on the job. I do want a sporting director, of course, that's done the job and has got a good rap sheet of progressing where they are, progressing the team that they work for, has got a good recruitment record as well. So whether that's Tomas Rosicky, we'll have to wait and see, but that's according to Santi Una reporting that story. Mikel Arteta did face the press yesterday and obviously covered a number of topics. He was asked about Declan Rice and Kai Havertz. He was very vague, as we've come to understand, especially ahead of games against major opponents. He doesn't tend to give much away. He said, I have to be very vague on that one regarding Rice because there's no clarity on whether he's going to be fit for the weekend. He was asked about whether he'd broken his toe, and he said, that's for the doctor. What I can say is that he hasn't trained yet, and it's not clear whether he's going to be available or not to play. He wants to keep the opponents guessing. He may have trained. It may be that Arteta's not being entirely accurate in what he's telling us. And we have to come to an understanding that that is going to be the case. I'm never annoyed when Arteta gives an answer that turns out to be slightly averse from the truth, because he's just doing what he thinks is best for Arsenal. He's doing what he thinks is best for the context of the opponent, and trying not to give away too much. Asked about Odegaard, he said, and potentially starting. Everybody that is in the squad is going to be fit and available to start the game. So then it will be a decision whether it is too early or the right moment for him to make that step again. Asked about Havertz and Merino, he said, we'll have to wait until tomorrow to see how they react. Kai had quite a nasty cut and he could not continue. With Mikel, to be fair, the day before he wasn't feeling great, and we decided to sub him at halftime. I am critical of that decision, because you've got Jorginho on the bench. You've got Jorginho sitting, waiting to play. He feels fine. And you've got Merino, who supposedly the day before wasn't feeling too great, and yet he starts. He didn't even bring on Jorginho at half-time because tactically the game demanded a different type of change. But I find it very strange, very strange indeed that that he didn't choose to use Jorginho in this particular game. Very much so. He was asked about the progress of Chelsea, and he said, I'm really impressed about what Maresca's done, but what they've done over a year, because with Maurizio Pochettino, the last 6 months were extraordinary. You could see the squad, the quality they have, the amount of players they have, and then Enzo has given his touch, and you can see clearly what he wants to do. I think he's been really brave from day one, consistent to follow what he wanted to do. I know how he thinks. I know a lot of people that know him very well, and I'm very happy that he is making a lot of progress there as well. He was asked if he thinks the title race will be over if we don't win on Sunday, and he says, I don't think about that, and quite rightly so. He asked if the team has needed a rest this week, or rather a reset this week, and he says, we don't need a reset. We need in one particular aspect to go from 95 to 100, and I'm not going to tell you what that is. So clearly he feels there's things we're not doing that he thinks we should be doing, but he's not going to give us at all about any kind of information on that. He was asked about whether Martin would join up with the Norway squad, and he says, let's see how he goes, how he trains tomorrow. He's available, he's fit. If he does play, it's about how he's feeling after that, and then we'll make the decision between the three parties. Simon Collins of the Evening Standard did report that Arsenal would hold talks with Norway about whether or not now he would join up. Seems that there's been a little bit of a shift from the story. Of course, we've heard previously that he wasn't going to go, but good work by Simon to get that scoop, of course, for the Standard. Asked about the system and how we might adopt Martin back into the side. He says, we have had to adapt a lot of things this season because we've had a lot of injuries and a lot of situations, especially in the back line and midfield. So that's something that the team is learning as well as adapting to. A lot of times it has worked really well. Other times something is missing because he's going to be different. But the team definitely has the capacity to do that. But it hasn't. You know, it hasn't had the capacity to do that in games. And that's, I wouldn't say Arteta has been entirely accurate in that. Yes, we've had to adapt. He talks about going from 95 to 100. We've been far from 95%. This Arsenal team's looked about 40%, you know, at times. It's not looked at. I think we looked better against Inter. We were better against Liverpool. But Bournemouth and Newcastle were really poor performances. And we haven't adapted necessarily well to Odegaard's absence as much as we perhaps should have done. And there's been, I think, too much reliance on Trossard to play a role that really does not accentuate his best qualities. And that is definitely a concern. Right, let's go to part two and your questions then, right after this. Okay, this is part two of the show where we tackle your questions and more. So without further ado, let's jump into the chat and tackle some of your thoughts. Let's go to TGR. Says, I keep hearing about this so-called transfer committee. Everybody wants the credit when a transfer goes well, and it's a red-headed stepchild when they don't. Laughing Man says, Arteta wants to justify big signings like Havertz last year. He seems to be pretty stubborn. I mean, Havertz, to be fair, definitely justified at the end of the season, you know, that signing. You know, the way in which we ended last season, Havertz was a big part of that. This season, of course, he was on a run of 6 or 7 Emirates games scoring in a row. You know, we want to see more, but I think it's been more about the creativity than Havertz's role. I think, you know, Havertz had a poor game against Newcastle. Bournemouth, he worked exceptionally hard, but wasn't getting service in that game. And obviously going down to 10 men for an hour of it was a big problem. But I just feel as though, you know, the scrutiny on Havertz needs to be more so on Arteta and his selection to be creative. I think we could have made other choices in midfield. I think we could have brought in Waneri earlier. And I'm struggling with the Havertz situation. Raybeam says, we all know that we're looking for an ideal replacement for Edu from ex-players, that Lord Bentner is now the only choice. Can you imagine to that? Amar Gooner says, Tom, I don't listen to Arteta's press conferences. He reminds me sometimes of Eric Cantona and the Seagulls. The Seagulls, they follow the trawler, which actually was, while absolutely mentally like crazy, it's a very clever comment. And if you go kind of read into that, talking about kind of like the Seagulls being in some ways the journalists and the media, following, of course, the thing that is, trying to give them the scraps. And it was a clever comment at the time that got very much blown out of proportion. But he was a wacky guy, remains a wacky guy. And I think there's something about Eric Cantona that I think everybody kind of loves, and other aspects that are completely terrible. Front Yard says, I'm tired of the ex-player thing now. No disrespect to Rosicky, but we need the best to be the best. I'd lie if I said I knew who that is, but surely more experience is needed. Well, that's the thing, Front Yard. Is like you say that I'd lie if I said I know who that is. But Tomas Rosicky, like I told you, he's not my first choice. But it's interesting that people are writing him off just because he's a former Arsenal player, because Edu was a former Arsenal player. And don't forget, despite all of this, frankly, embarrassing criticism of Edu, like I don't mind some criticism when it's fair and accurate and right, talking about some of the deals that weren't too great, the fact it took too long to improve the sales record, the missing transfers in some aspects and some of the misses. But overall, Edu's work, of course, re-established Arsenal with a squad that's now challenging every year, or at least we hope it does for a third year. And just because of that, I get it's kind of like a Chelsea, like the way you would sign like players from Chelsea, and of course Havertz and Jorginho have been good signings for Arsenal, but the David Luiz's, the Willians made it so that everyone was like, I don't want to sign another player from Chelsea. So, oh, okay. Like, so that we're just branding everyone with the same brush. Like, would you sign Cole Palmer? Because I would. And Cole Palmer's been an absolutely fantastic player, but no, can't sign him because he plays for Chelsea. Same way, Tomas Rosicky's done a fantastic job at Sparta Prague. As we talked about there, he's got them back into the Champions League for the first time in 19 years. And we're like, no, because he's a former Arsenal player. It's a generalization. It's an ignorant generalization. I've got people on my mind that I think, Simon Rolfs I talk about a lot. But you could talk about the sporting directors who have worked at clubs like Atalanta or Inter or Napoli, and clubs that have really risen over the last few years. Villarreal have done some brilliant transfer business as well. But it is amazing to me how quickly people want to just dismiss somebody because of a background and not actually anything to do with what they've done in their role. Jonga says, hey, Tom, why do you think Arteta keeps making the same mistakes? He must see the same as us fans do. He sees a lot more than we do, to be fair. He's got access to, obviously, the training. He's got access to the players themselves. People obviously forget, I think, that they think everything they see is the full picture, and it's not. He'll be seeing them in training week in, week out, and that will have an impact, of course, on what he selects, on who he selects for games. But I think there is an element of stubbornness. I think there is an element of being too cautious, especially with Waneri. And we have paid the price, I think, for that. Cena says, Tom, how could we say that the fan base has improved and the atmosphere around the club has gotten better when everything changes so fast after a bad period? I think, Cena, because there's a difference between the fans when you go on a match day, and this isn't all fans, but I think there is a difference between the discourse on social media and the fans that you actually can have a chat with on a match day, no matter whether they're coming from abroad, whether they're season ticket holders. I think when you have a chat with anyone at the ground, yeah, there's concerns. Yeah, there are some people who are in some ways synonymous with the hysteria online. But I think, Cena, that social media ultimately provides an anonymous platform for people to be pretty ingenuine and to be basically hyperbole versions of themselves. So that's why you get a sense that there's this meltdown and this utter kind of apathy. When in reality, when I go to games and I speak to, fans there, or I speak to friends of mine who are going and speak to other members of the media, it's nowhere near as hysterical as it is online. Nowhere near as hysterical. Not at all. Yes, there's criticisms and frustrations, and there are people, of course, that go games that are still hysterical online, but nowhere near to the same level and degree. I think it's a social media thing. I think that's how it is. So the fan base, the atmosphere has definitely improved. The atmosphere has got question marks, but it's always had question marks. We really only had one proper good season of like frenetic atmosphere at Arsenal, and that was the 22-23 season, which was somewhat of a surprise. It was surprising that Arsenal were in a title race, and I think the crowd rode that wave of momentum more than any other factor, be that, you know, the Ashburton Army, or be that just being a little bit better, or be that, you know, Arteta had kind of got himself in the job a little bit longer. The reason why the atmosphere primarily was brilliant during the 22-23 season as a primary reason was because of our form, was because of how good we were and the fact that we were in a title race. And then the following season, even though we got even more points and scored more goals, we kind of expected it. We kind of expected that more. There was an expectation and an entitlement. And I think when we started to, like, if we'd go a goal down or you didn't score for 30 minutes, the atmosphere would go flat quicker because there was more of an expectation and entitlement about us inside the ground. And that's just psychology, isn't it? So I think that probably answers the question best. And Fergus says, Cena, remove all the keyboard warriors. It makes people, rather, remove the keyboards and it makes people a lot more sensible. It does. Like, that is just a reality. Like, social media and keyboard worrying in general has created kind of this view that people think things are one way when the reality is, in the real world, very, very different. Ife says he doesn't just have access to training, he also trains them. You're very right, mate. Roy says, Tom, apart from transfers, what else does a sporting director do? Or is that the sole role and takes up all of their time? So from an Arsenal perspective, Edu's job wasn't obviously just about transfers. He oversaw the academy. He oversaw the women's team. You obviously have processes of replacing other kind of members of staff off the field, working at building relationships with other clubs. Of course, you have your scouting department that you have got to manage as well. You're looking potentially on some commercial aspects with the managing director or the CEO, if indeed a club has got one. A lot of discussions of building relationships, networking, and better understanding the game. R&D, even for clubs, has got to be falling on a sporting director as well. So the job is far beyond just transfers. Like, if you want to talk about what and delegation, delegation is a big part of that. You've got to manage a big group of people. You've got to give those people their roles, what their specific tasks are going to be over a certain period of time. You're a manager off the field, basically. You're a manager of the executives. You're a manager of the off-field staff, the non-playing staff, the non-coaching staff. And also you're working with the manager at the same time. And you've got to have meetings, and, you've got to try and work synonymously to build towards the ultimate goal, the ultimate project. You're meeting with the ownership. You're meeting with the vice chairman, Tim Lewis. So it's a huge role that for Edu's going to get even bigger when he moves supposedly, potentially, into the Marinakis group and oversees a number of clubs, because then it's going to be working with lots of different directors of specific clubs. So, yeah, that is where we are at. Barry says, I hate the word expectation. It should be hope. I prefer the word expectation to entitlement, but I prefer the word aim, Barry. I think there's a difference between, and I talk about this a lot, so apologies for boring you with the analogy again, but there's a difference between expectation and aims. Every season, Arsenal aim for the title. They aim for all of the trophies. They aim, as Arteta says, to win 100+ points, to win every single fixture. That is Arsenal's aim. The expectation that they sit down realistically and talk about will be different. Of course, there'll be expectations to challenge and compete for the title, and that's certainly my expectation for Arsenal, is to compete for the title. And if we don't do that season, it will be an underachievement. It will be a disappointment, based upon what we've spent, based upon the manager that we've got, based upon the player that we've got. And there are factors that change that, injuries, bad luck, sendings off, controversial decisions. There are factors out of your control that, of course, do affect that, and you analyze that and assess that at the end of a season. But it's still going to be disappointing, and you've got to then justify why you're continuing in the certain project that you are, based upon a result that perhaps wasn't as good as what you wanted. But the aims and expectations of the club are, of course, two very different things. Anne says, have you liked the video yet? Guys, make sure you please do. Thank you, Ansa, for your reminder. Please do drop a like on the video. It really does help us out, and takes you just a second, and it really does help us out. Sina says, I mean, it's easy to be a fan during winning periods, but the situation is so different. The thing is, those negative opinions don't see the red cards or the injuries. I love criticism, but not the abuse. Unfortunately, as well, like social media is a cudgel for negativity. Its algorithms promote hysteria. It promotes anger. It promotes shouting. It promotes abuse. Certainly in the last few years, since Twitter's changed of hands, for instance, it's a place that enables hate to spread much easier than hope. Hope doesn't sell headlines. Hope doesn't sell clicks or views to videos. Anger and shouting and fakeness and all of these aspects, that ultimately lead to people having ingenuine views because they know that that's what brings in the money and that's what brings in the track and brings in the headlines and brings in the clicks. That sells far more than optimism, sadly, especially when football's such a tribal sport. And you've got kind of fans of other clubs that enjoy watching the downfall, enjoy watching the madness. I can't tell you how many times I've watched No Context Goldbridge. No Context Goldbridge is one of my favorite Twitter accounts to follow because when Man United lose, I absolutely love watching Mark Goldbridge's meltdowns. They are some of the best pieces of content. Same goes for Expressions. Like when Spurs lose, and not just Expressions, I can't remember the two lads on the Spurs side of things. They do kind of the watch-alongs. It's some of the best content out there to absorb. So I'm sitting here saying, of course, that's what spreads. But that's because I know for a fact that we as humans enjoy that. We enjoy those meltdowns. We enjoy that chaos. We enjoy watching other people's misery for clubs that we don't particularly like. And that's just part of human nature, it feels, in 2024. That's the macabre of it all, really. Brendan says, TC, with all the negativity about the club in the media, is it easy to forget that there are 28 games left in the season? If Arsenal turn around this rump against CFC, we could see a run. Absolutely. This game of the weekend is huge. This game tomorrow is massive. This game is the biggest of Arsenal's season. Without question, it's the biggest game. Bigger than Man City, bigger than Liverpool, bigger than Inter Milan, bigger than PSG, bigger than Spurs. This is the biggest game of our season. We have to win this game. If we don't win this game, the mood over the international break is going to be the lowest I think it's ever been. Arsenal's title ambitions are nearly all but gone. And focus turns to cup competitions to the Champions League far more. And I put a tweet out yesterday, and it irritated a few people. And I'll end the show on this point because I'm conscious I've got to go start work. But I put a tweet out that annoyed a few people, emboldened some others. I said this to those who say now, and this was on the 7th, so 2 days ago, so on Thursday. To those who say the season is over, I say, close your apps, cancel your subscriptions, save your money, focus on other things, other interests. If that's you listening, feel free to unsubscribe. I know a few people that tweeted me back to that tweet said they were going to unsub, and that's fine. If you think the season's done, if you think we ain't winning anything, if you're finished, then apply your energy elsewhere because the negativity, I just don't want it. I just don't need this energy. I don't need it. We can be critical. You can criticize things that we've done. I certainly have. You can be not happy. You can be unhappy with where we are. If you're like, we ain't winning anything now. Season's over, finished. Season's finished. We're in a cup quarter final. Champions League still going. FA Cup still to come. We're still not entirely out of the title race. And of course, Sunday's game, I think, will have a big hand in whether or not we are. If the season's done, then jack it in. If you think the season's over, why are you still here? Why are you still chatting? Because it's pointless you being here, really. We just don't need the energy. Just don't need it. And ironically, I think a lot of those comments are saying the season's done are from the same people that have been crying out for Arsenal to win a trophy outside the Premier League, to go for the League Cup, to not go out of it early, despite the fact we're now in a quarter-final with a great chance of going to a semi-final. So we've got Palace, So if you think the season's done, take some of your own medicine, take your own advice, and take your negativity elsewhere. Thank you for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your Saturday. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy, stay respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.